So a little bit about Steinwall Incorporated, so you get a context, it was started by my father in 1965. He went into injection molding in 73 at about 24 employees and $1 million in revenue. When he called me, I was a tax accountant, and next slide, and said to me, hey, how do you sell a business? And I said, you sell it to your daughter, because I really, really enjoy operations and manufacturing, and kind of was getting stuck in the accounting part of the game. So I joined them in 1983 and then bought 100% of the stock in 1987 and have been doing it ever since. Currently, we're 25 million in sales, about 170 employee, 3 shifts, 24/5. And a little of my background, you're going to hear a lot about lifelong learning from me, because it just doesn't stop. And so I have a bachelor's in accounting and an MBA in operations management. Got myself into a little bit of a pickle in the 1990s, went back, somebody recommended the OPM program at Harvard, so I went and did that. Still didn't have a real good handle on the human element of running a business, so I went and got a doctorate in organizational management and did my dissertation on optimism. And so now I think I really do have a handle on the human element, which is a big part of what I'll be talking about. But now that I'm kind of entering into retirement, as my son is taking over the business, I dived into learning a lot about data science and robots and electricians. And so my point being is, I don't think your learning journey ever stops. It's just a continuing path. So that's a little about background. Before we get into my aha moments, I want to just get a framework so we're all on the same level playing field here. In running a business, it's all about the levers of control and optimizing for productivity. It's not about maximizing anything. I think it's important that we keep it all in balance. You have the idea of productivity is you have to have more output than you have for input. And you have these 5 levers of control. And the idea is to, make certain that the mixture of how you're putting your business plan together produces more output than input. So that's the goal. The other framework I'd like to talk about is the management framework, the next slide. And in my opinion, if you don't have these 4 questions answered for employees, you can't really be running the business appropriately. So basically, you have to have answers to what am I to do, how or why am I to do it, what does good look like, and how am I doing? So what I find oftentimes is I knew what I wanted people to do, but I didn't have it clearly laid out in such a crisp way. So these are the frameworks that I'll jump into my next aha moments for you on, that I can't stress this one enough, because I boiled everything that I learned in all of my scholarly ventures down into 3 key elements. And the first being that you have to have an absolutely crystal clear vision of where the company is to go. And that takes maybe 5% of your time to figure out, okay, I'm all motivated and passionate about taking this business down this path. So then the next challenge is to communicate it to all of your employees. That is incredibly difficult. It sometimes takes 7 to 14 times of saying it before somebody even hears you. That probably takes 80% of your effort. And then empower the employees then to take the business and join you on this journey to your vision and with empowerment. And empowerment is the same thing as optimism. So if you have pessimistic employees, you can't get them empowered. It just doesn't work. So if you can kind of keep these 3 keys focused on your on running your business at a high level, I think it's pretty important. The second aha moment I'll share with you is this empowering problem-solving model. So how do you keep the employees empowered now that you've got them all pulling in the same direction? is to watch your language. And when people bring you problems, it's usually Mary screwed up, Sam's made a mistake, those kinds of human elements sentences. And what we have to do as leaders is to reframe it, to keep it a positive statement by saying, all right, so where in the process did management fail Mary? What process didn't we have completely laid out? Go back to those 4 management questions. What was she supposed to do? How and why was she supposed to do it? Did she do it well? And if you reframe it as the managers are making the mistakes, that management failed, you all of a sudden start seeing people not be so afraid. And they just absolutely get engaged in solving the problem. But then I would have employees say back to me, oh, no, Maureen, you don't understand. Mary really did screw up. This was all on Mary. And I said, no, it's still a process failure. Where in our training did we fail Mary? Well, is our training absolutely perfect? So then you look back, your process was perfect, your training was perfect. So now what? No, Maureen, so Mary really did screw up. She did it on purpose. I said, no, it's still a process failure. Our hiring and firing processes failed us. So whenever you see opportunities for improvement that come to you, if you can reframe them as a process failure, I think you can keep people pretty empowered. And that's a real huge aha experience. We all know that engaging the employees leads to productivity improvement. The third aha is the learning curve. Oftentimes I'll hear people say, I've communicated, I told people what it is that is important. But what we have to recognize that is sometimes it takes 7 times plus or minus a whole bunch more before all of the stimulus, all of the information that comes to us through our 5 senses works its way through our working memory, which is a very narrow part of our ability to process cognitively. And before then it's put into a schema that allows us to really understand the information. So if you aren't constantly pounding the drum about the vision and staying positive about engaging the employees, you really haven't done a very good job of communication. So there you go. Those are my 3 aha moments. Only took me 40 years to figure that one out. The last, and I've only got a couple more moments. So let me share with you the next slide. And this is, whoops. Where'd it go?
There it is.
Okay, so that was it. All right. Well, there's some closing thoughts. No, that's okay. I can just talk on it. Some closing thoughts. Personally, I find it incredibly important that you are authentic. Just because somebody else is doing something doesn't mean it's authentic to you. So be authentic to yourself, be passionate about what it is that you're doing. Keep your work and your life balanced. Talk to therapists. They are awesome listeners and can help you reframe the situations that might be causing you pain, and continue to do lifelong learning. It's absolutely critical. From a business perspective, get rid of bullies. Prima donnas, people that might do their work very, very well, but are mean, disrespectful, throw temper tantrums. There's just no place for those folks in an engaged work environment. And it really does kind of kill the optimism and brings the business into a pessimistic world. So it's not the toxic experience that bullies leave in the culture is just not worth it. Get rid of, I'd rather have 3 average people than 3 bullies. Keep the balance between all of those different levers of control. Have a plan, know where your vision is going, and understand that profit is just the scorekeeping. Then, there my timer went off, see? Now I can't figure out how to dismiss it. There we go. And then the closing thought is what keeps you awake at night? And I don't think you can ever get over the importance of cash flow. If there's any sleepless nights I had, it was cash flow. And the other thing was, are people safe? Are they working safely? Are there any issues or people getting hurt on the job? That would keep me up at night all the time. So I will pass the baton. That was awfully fast. I could talk for 3 hours on these topics, but that was what Steve told me to do.
Thank you, Maureen, and we'll have a chance to revisit in the Q&A. And I do apologize. I advanced this one slide and it jumped into Willie's section. So let's see.
No problem. I only had 2 more slides, and that was just fine.
So I'm going to cue up Willie's slides, and who knows if yours somehow drift in there. I can't explain it, but let's move forward. Willie, we've got a sound issue.
He's in mute.
There you go.
You know, Steve, I don't think I've ever been so pushy as to push into somebody else's talk before. That's
well, her slides may end up in your section. I do not know what happened, so we'll figure it out later.
Yeah, Maureen, thanks for the talk. I mean, it's the points that you made were absolutely great. I'm going to talk about valuing your company. You know, is what is actually critical to grow and improve your company. Have the next slide, please. Avika was founded in 1994 as a spinoff from 3M. I was working there as first a chemist and then a manager, and I had an opportunity to buy a pilot plant from 3M. It was a great opportunity. I took that pilot plant and made it into a contract manufacturing company doing particle processing. When I explained this to my mother, she always asked me, what do you do for a company? And I says, I make dust is what I actually do. And we take other people's materials and we grind them up or we dry them and we make particles out of them. We're about 280 employees in 5 locations. And in 2019, right before we sold the company as an ESOP, we were $39 million in sales. And during the valuation process, we actually got a value of $53 million. What I'm going to talk about, and I'd have the next slide, please, is what we did right to grow our company to get to this final value. And some of these things, hopefully you'll see as important for you. Like Maureen, having a clear vision and mission is incredibly important. In most of these things I stumbled onto as I was running the company for 25 years. I built a great management team. I cannot stress how important it is for you to have a great management team. But as important as a great management team is to have an incredibly sophisticated financial system. And I can tell you, I did not have that until about a year before I sold my company. I wish I would have had it earlier, and hopefully my talk will impress upon you how important it is. If you don't have a history of consistent growth, it's hard to run a business. How do you get to that history of consistent growth? That's part of the bits and pieces for your company. We have a very diversified business. I think that was important for me. You know, the ups and downs like we're going through right now in COVID, part of my business goes down, part of my business goes up. It's absolutely a great thing. And finally, the thing that I really want to talk about is understanding the business valuation drivers. If you understand those drivers, and I would say that most people, myself included, maybe all of you already have this understood. I did not understand what was going to drive the value of my business. So if I can have the next slide, we'll start talking about this. Well, I'm going to talk about how people value companies first. And basically, there's 3 ways to do it. Comparables, just like they do in the housing industry. You know, they compare the house down the street to yours and see how it's done. That's a pretty unsophisticated way of doing it, and it's probably not used that much. The one that we hear about is, as business owners, we hear about the value of your company as some multiple of EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, and depreciation and amortization. And that's really interesting, but no one ever told me, how do you get a higher multiple, which is what you want, because what a higher multiple indicates that you've got a better company, that somebody's going to value it more. But there was always this kind of this mystery out there about this. And as I got ready to sell my company, we actually found out that the way people actually value companies is a discounted free cash method. And I want to talk about this as it reflects on how you set up your company and go to it. So next slide, please. In that what can change the value of your company is in this discounted free cash model. It's a formula. And if you know these things, what is a beta? This is part of the formula. This is volatility of your company as opposed to the stock market. So just think, if your company goes crazy as opposed to the stock market, people don't necessarily give you as high a value. The equity risk premium, an investor's taking a look at your company and saying, you know, I could put it into bonds, which is a, you know, basically risk-free investment, versus what's the risk premium that I'm going to have if I put it in yours. And so a high risk premium is not necessarily a good thing, because that means that your company is riskier than that bond application. And so they're going to want a different valuation for it. Weighted average cost of capital. Are you using debt or equity? Debt is cheap, equity is expensive. And if you're using a lot of that, you know, that can change the value of your company. And then finally, a term called perpetuity growth rate. And this is what people are looking at, is how should your company grow as opposed to the financial markets. And typically, if you're an average company, you should have a perpetuity growth rate that's equivalent to the growth of the GDP. So, you know, in the last 3 or 4 years, we're seeing GDP growth rates of 2 to 3%. That would be an average perpetuity rate. Can I have the next slide, please? So this is the secret formula that you really want to know to value your company. Basically, the enterprise value of your company, and this is how everybody values companies. At the end of the day, there's someplace in the back room, there's a gnome that's actually doing this calculation. Basically, what they're taking is 5 years of free cash value. So let's just think about what I just said there. Somebody expects to know what your projected sales are going to be for the next 5 years. This is an indication of a highly sophisticated financial system. I think if we asked everybody to raise their hands, if you know what your projected sales for the next 5 years are be, we get a lot of laughs. But you know, as it turns out, if you're going to actually drive your business to high valuation and run your business properly, you actually need to do that. Free cash value is your net income plus your depreciation minus the change in working capital minus capital expenditures. I want to make sure you understand this. You take your net income to get your free cash value and you subtract what you spend for capital. So every time you add a piece of equipment, you lower the value of your company for that year. That's a heck of a statement right there. But if you don't add capital to your business, you never have the opportunity to grow. So basically, if you're running your business properly, you are always in a stressful situation that I don't want to add capital because it's going to decrease the value of my company. And I do want to add capital because in the future, it's going to increase the value of my company. Managing that is incredible. I never knew that until I got right to the end. You take go back, I'm sorry. You take your free cash value for each year and divide it by 1 plus the weighted average cost of capital, that's a percent, minus your perpetuity rate. And you can see how this formula flows out. And at the end of the day, you will get an enterprise value. Now I can take the next slide. Steve, next slide, thank you. What you're really looking for is the equity value. And the equity value is equal to the enterprise value minus the debt that you have plus the cash you have on hand. So I actually had a valuation of my company of $53 million. I had about $4 million worth of cash on hand. So yeah, I'm going to add that. That was added onto the system. And I'm going to subtract off the $13 million of debt that I have to get my equity value. At the end of the day, we had an equity value that the shareholders actually got of $40 million. The value drivers in this whole situation go back to what I said earlier on, is the stability of the company. If you're stabler, people like it. And they'll actually put a number on that. So stabler means that your business isn't jumping all over the place. A good year one year, a bad year the next year. Maybe you're a great company, but who knows what you're going to do the next year. The size of the company, as it turns out, you get a lower ER or a better ERP if your company is bigger. So surprise, surprise, Walmart is an easier company for somebody to buy than our companies because we're small. The more sophisticated your management is, the better the perpetuity rate. They believe in your company. They actually can believe it. And the history of growth is the same way. If you have a high history of growth, really driving towards that is important because it's going to show up in an incredible factor in the valuation of your business. As I said earlier, capital expenditures, they're bad every time you do them. But if you don't do them, you're in problems because you won't have that growth going on in the future. And debt, the less is better. But if you don't take debt, you'll never have enough money to grow your company. Balance that all out, and you can see why nobody gets any sleep if you own a company. Can I have the last slide, please? So you as a person that you're in the process of growing your company and maybe trying to get it to ready to sell, but at least, that should be an end game of it. You have to make a number of decisions. One of the decisions that you have to make is, are you a lifestyle company? Are you using your company to buy all your boats and cabins and vacations? Or are you actually taking that profit and putting it back into your company to grow? Either one is fine, but if you're a lifestyle company, you're going to have a low value at the end of your time. Just you're taking out your company value now as opposed to taking it out in the future. I didn't really talk about this, but one of the things to really consider as your company grows, you're going to have to adjust your management team. In the course of 25 years, I have changed my management team structure and people because things have changed in my company probably 3, maybe 4 times. It never happens just all at once, but there's always kind of evolutions that are going on. But I would say that I can identify at least 3 and possibly 4 management groups that we've had. Is your company financially sophisticated? I cannot stress the importance of you knowing what you're doing with your company. And this just isn't a P&L. This is that projection into the future so you can actually know and be able to talk with the people that are going to buy your company or even your own employees about how you're going to grow the company. And finally, this is the old saw, are you as the leader operating in the business? Are you out there doing something, or are you actually sitting back and being the strategic leader of your company? If you can do all these things and understand that secret formula and have that sophisticated financial basis, you can really grow your company and you can really drive it to high value. And thank you, Steve.
All right, thank you, Willie. We're going to transition to Matt. If you could turn on your video. And we'll
all right.
Great, welcome.
Thank you. Willie and Maureen, that's really got a lot out of both your presentations. I appreciate it. I'm going to tell a story, I think, just of where I started and how I got to where I'm at currently, and what I'm learning now that I wish I knew, earlier. So, next slide, please, Steve. I started life as an electrician, so just kind of telling my story. I got married early, jumped into being an electrician right out of high school. I've always had a strong desire to continue learning and to keep growing. So Maureen talked about it too, this lifelong learning. I want to learn, I want to grow. I changed jobs after I'd gotten my journeyman and master's licensed at age 25 and got into the cell phone business, just stumbled into it, kind of dumb luck. And I worked in that industry from 96 to 2003. And I went around the country and got licensed in different states and got experience managing people and whatnot in different places, but kind of through the cell phone business. So next slide, please. Realizing I'm working in the cell phone business and I've got my own ideas, and I'm realizing I had thoughts on how I wanted to do things. I knew how to do the work, and I looked at what my employers were doing, and I thought, boy, I could do that too. You know, this kind of young, independent mind of like, I can do what they can do, and I think I can give it a shot on my own. So I wanted to give it a try. I worked first by myself, but realized that's not where I want to be. You know, doing everything by yourself, crawl into the attic, crawl out of the attic, put your hand in the wall. There's no wire, crawl back into the attic. That's a kind of a drag. So I raided my 401k. I started this business, and in February 2003, chose the name Mill City Electric. It was chosen, I think we were sitting at the kitchen table, and I thought, I want this to be bigger than myself for whatever reason. I didn't really know why, but I wanted it to be bigger than myself. Next slide, please. Mill City started out as an electrical contractor focused on high-end residential remodeling. I was familiar with it. We grew from 1 employee to 12 employees during the first 5 years, so just kind of figuring out how to do business. During that time, I was working hand in hand with these employees, and we really were creating the culture together. They understood how I wanted things done, I understood how they worked, and we really kind of had this fit. And I think I realized during that point that the culture is important, how we do things is important, and we use that kind of basis to build out the rest of the business. So these folks, you know, that started with me ended up kind of working their way up in the business as the company grew. So one pivot point that I was going to mention is as I started to understand financials, as I, you know, the lifelong learning piece, as I was learning more, I started to look at financials, and I started to realize that, you know, revenue is not the same as profitability. And I was working for some customers, and I wasn't making any money. And so I remember this scary time. I went in and I basically fired the customer. I said, you know, I'm not making money, and I appreciate the work, but I've got to move on. And so that was really kind of a pivot point and a chat. You know, it would have been easy just to keep doing it, but we wouldn't have went anywhere. So as a result of that, I started reconnecting with the wireless business, and this was in 2007. So being at the right place at the right time, Steve Jobs comes out with the iPhone in 2007, and the wireless cell phone business just takes off. So we grew from $1 million in revenue during the first 5 years. So 5 years in, we're at about $1 million in revenue. And then in the next 6 years, we grew from $1 million to $23 million. And, you know, just realizing that being that place of growth and opportunity for people is invigorating. I like being in that place. Next slide, please. Growth is expensive, so it's also draining, and I was exhausted. And so, you know, I had these loose feelings about my personal drivers as a guy, but I didn't really have them figured out yet. They just were kind of intuitions. You know, I knew I wanted personal freedom from partners, from debt, from guarantees. I wanted to reduce my financial risk, and I felt like the time was right. So I hired an investment banker May of 2013. I sold the business in January of 14. You know, the due diligence process is like another job added to your existing job. So it's having that team is key to getting that done. And also, just a side note, once you get into it, it's kind of hard to figure out, do I share this with people? Do I not share this with people? You know, kind of just making these, you know, all these decisions as you go is hard to kind of know if you're doing the right thing. So the analogy I use is it's like taking the first few paddle strokes on a whitewater rafting trip once you decide to sell. It's like, yeah, a nice couple of strokes, and pretty soon you're just racing down this torrent. And it's like, boy, that's not the right time to start figuring out, you know, what do I want out of this? It's too late. You're already in the, you know, in the rapid. So that's my analogy. Next slide, please. I sold the business in January 6th of 2014. And I had hoped during that sale that it would bolt on horsepower needed to take the company to the next level. We were a regional contractor working in the cell phone space, and I wanted to take it nationally. Mill City made it 5 years after I sold it. I lasted 1 year and 3 months. Couple of lessons learned: don't count on the earnout; it's icing on the cake. I didn't get mine because the business changed, the industry changed. People told me most entrepreneurs don't stick around very long after a sale. And I thought, you're dead wrong. I'm going to stick it out. But you realize right away that that's not easy to do. I would say question the buyer, work hard to understand their timeline and their objectives, be ready to walk away from a deal. So question them. You know, a lot of times we feel like, I hope they don't realize that we're just a tiny business that grew, and that, you know, it's like you're trying to sell this thing before they discover that you're a fraud. And it's like, no, it's a good business. You know, you have to be confident in that. After the sale and after I quit working for the people that bought my business, I had time to research new technology. So I realized that researching new technologies and seeing what's coming next is exciting. I had time to study solar, electric vehicle charging infrastructure, battery storage, wind, smart grid, many of the things we're currently doing. And I kind of looking back, I thought, boy, if I could have been doing that then, maybe I wouldn't have wanted to sell. Maybe if I wasn't in the day-to-day, I could have been doing the visionary work. So that's just a side note. Next slide, please. Premise Inc. So the same week I left Mill City, I started Premise Inc. I didn't know what we were going to do. It took reconnecting with a friend about a year later to get it kicked off. And we formed a partnership and we got going. We started out being a general contractor and realized right away that's not what we want to do. So pivoting again is okay. It's okay to pivot. After my non-compete ran out, I had the opportunity to make some strategic hires in the wireless space. And we ended up buying back the assets of Mill City. I hired some folks from Mill City, which forced them to leave the market. They were pretty small by that point, and we ended up buying the assets back. And I've probably a third of my employees are former Mill City employees, which is kind of interesting. We've grown Premise from, you know, the startup in basically in 2016 to about 100 employees and a little over 20 million this year. So, and we're looking forward to the future to continue growing. Next slide, please. So lessons being, I was going to call it lessons learned, but it's really lessons being learned. I'm in the process of learning these right now, as Steve can attest. Figuring out what drives me is key. And looking back, these are the things in orange through my presentation here. They were there all along. I just didn't have my finger on them. And so I've always had a strong desire to continue learning and keep growing. I've had my own ideas. I wanted to try things. I need employees. I like having employees. I wanted the business to be something bigger than myself. Culture is important. Being at the right place at the right time, you know, kind of trying to be ahead of things. That's important to me. Being a place of growth and opportunity, reducing risk, the team, and researching new technologies. So these are all things that I've recently learned that are important to me. So these are my drivers. So when I look, so the next point here is plan your exit now. I don't plan to leave anytime soon, but I'm already starting to think about the exit because, you know, once I get there, I want to have the plan in place. Kind of to what Willie spoke about, there's a lot of drivers that can increase value. And if you are focused and understand that, it gives you options, bottom line. So building the team of advisors is another lesson I'm learning, and that's key. And then focusing on things that build long-term value, just echoing that. Next slide, please. Talking about the CEO Next program, I had the fortune of being a part of the program last year. It was a weird year with COVID, but kind of some quick takeaways from that. There's a lot of people who want you to succeed. Small businesses are the lifeblood of our economy. They drive innovation and they create jobs. So expect to be supported by the program. Build your network. This is another takeaway. As you're going into the program, build your network. Expect to connect to people. Meeting with peers who are experiencing similar challenges is invaluable. They help you broaden your viewpoint. They provide insights and give you accountability. Expect to be challenged. Use the system for integrated growth. I'm assuming the same thing is being used this year, Steve. Use the expert research. You know, start thinking about that now. What areas do you need help in your business? Start thinking about it. And then once you engage with the group, really drive them. Drive to get the answers that you're looking for. So expect to be the engagement. The program is designed to fill in knowledge gaps. Something that I can attest to. It's working in the background, even when it doesn't feel like it. Sometimes you're just being steeped in it and it's soaking in, but it doesn't, you're not always going, what's the direct takeaway? So expect to learn and expect to grow your business. We grew in 25 employees in the year we were in the program, so expect to expand. that's, I think, next slide, please. I think that's my presentation.